The sound of a shotgun blast echoed through the streets of Montrose, Colorado, as Vivian Shaw ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't supposed to be like this, not after everything she'd sacrificed to come west. The year was 1879, and the promise of a new beginning had turned to dust as quickly as her dreams. Vivian clutched the telegram in her trembling hands, the paper crumpled and tear-stained. 3 months ago, Edward Blackley had written of love, of marriage, of a home waiting for her in Montrose. She'd sold everything she owned in Boston, endured a grueling journey across the continent, only to find Edward married to another woman, a wealthy rancher's daughter who'd secured his future in a way Vivian's modest schoolteacher's savings never could. "Miss, get down." A strong hand gripped her shoulder, forcing her lower as another shot splintered the wood above her head. The bank robbery happening around her seemed a fitting backdrop to her shattered life. 1 week in Montrose, homeless, nearly penniless, and now caught in crossfire. Tears threatened, but she blinked them away. She'd done enough crying. "Stay behind me," the same voice commanded. Vivian looked up into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath a well-worn hat. The stranger's jaw was clenched tight as he checked the revolver in his hand. "I don't need your help," she snapped, shame making her voice sharper than intended, one corner of his mouth turned up slightly. "Madam, I respectfully disagree." A bullet whistled past, and in one fluid motion, the man pulled Vivian against his chest, shielding her with his body as he returned fire. 3 precise shots, and the street fell silent. "Name's Nathan Forrester," he said, helping her to her feet once the sheriff's men had secured the would-be robbers. "Most folks call me Nate." Vivian straightened her dusty skirts, painfully aware of her disheveled appearance. "Vivian Shaw." "I appreciate your assistance, Mr. Forrester, but I should be going." "Going where exactly?" His gaze was too perceptive, seeing too much of the desperation she was trying to hide. "That's hardly your concern," she replied, clutching her small valise, all that remained of her possessions. Nathan removed his hat, revealing thick chestnut hair. "Forgive my forwardness, Miss Shaw, but you look like someone who came to Montrose expecting one thing and found something else entirely." The simple truth of his words nearly undid her. "I don't need charity." "Charity wasn't what I had in mind." He gestured toward a building across the street with a hand-painted sign reading Forrester's General Store and Lodging. "I need help running my store. Previous clerk moved on to Denver last week. Room comes with the job. It's small, but it's clean." Vivian hesitated. "I don't know the first thing about clerking in a general store. Can you read, write, and count change without cheating folks?" When she nodded indignantly, he continued, "Then you know enough. Rest I can teach you." He paused, studying her face. "Unless you've got better prospects." They both knew she didn't. The shame of Edward's betrayal still burned hot, but hunger was a more immediate concern. Pride wouldn't fill her stomach or provide a roof over her head. "When would I start?" she asked quietly. Nathan's smile was warm, genuine. "How about after you've had a proper meal and some rest? You look like you've been through enough today." Something in his kindness, offered without pity, broke through Vivian's carefully constructed walls. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As they crossed the dusty street, Nathan's hand hovered near her elbow, not quite touching. "Montrose isn't always this exciting, I promise. Most days it's just folks trying to make their way." He glanced at her. "Whatever brought you here, Miss Shaw, maybe it was the wrong reason with the right destination." Vivian didn't believe him, couldn't believe in anything good just yet, but for the first time in days, she felt the smallest flicker of hope. The upstairs room was indeed small, but scrubbed clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a window overlooking the main street. Vivian set her valise on the bed, her hands shaking slightly as exhaustion caught up with her. "Washrooms down the hall," Nathan said, lingering in the doorway. "I'll have Mrs. Wilkins from the cafe bring up a tray. You look like you could use some food and rest before anything else." "Thank you," Vivian managed, the words feeling inadequate. "I don't understand why you're doing this." Nathan's expression grew serious. "5 years ago, I came to Montrose with nothing but $2 in my pocket and a world of hurt behind me. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most." He shrugged. "Just passing along the favor." After he left, Vivian sank onto the edge of the bed. The events of the past week crashed over her Edward's casual dismissal when she'd arrived. "Did you truly believe I would wait, darling? A man has needs." The humiliating realization that the entire town knew of her situation, the desperate search for employment only to be turned away with pitying glances. Mrs. Wilkins arrived with a tray bearing a bowl of stew, fresh bread, and a pot of tea. The older woman's eyes were kind as she set it down. "Mr. Forrester said you'd had a rough journey. Eat while it's hot, dear." "Do you know him well?" Vivian asked, unable to stop herself. Mrs. Wilkins smiled. "Known Nate since he first stumbled into town half dead from a mountain lion attack. Good man. Quiet about his past but decent through and through. Built this place from nothing." She patted Vivian's hand. "You could do worse for an employer." After Mrs. Wilkins left, Vivian ate ravenously, realizing she couldn't remember her last proper meal. The stew was rich with vegetables and chunks of beef, the bread still warm from the oven. When she finished, she washed using the water from the pitcher on the stand, changed into her nightgown, and fell into a dreamless sleep. Morning came with golden light streaming through the window and the sounds of the store opening below. Vivian dressed quickly in her second-best dress, now promoted to best by default, since she'd sold most of her belongings. She arranged her auburn hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, pinching her pale cheeks for color. Downstairs, Nathan was already assisting an elderly couple with feed supplies. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing muscular forearms dusted with the same dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He nodded at her entrance. "Miss Shaw, glad you could join us. Let me introduce you to Mr. and Mrs. Perkins. They run a small farm just outside town." The day passed in a whirlwind of introductions and instructions. Vivian learned the location of every item in the store, from nails to needles, flour to firearms. Nathan was patient but thorough, his business acumen evident in every transaction. By afternoon, Vivian was handling simple purchases on her own while Nathan managed inventory in the back room. "You're a quick study," he remarked when they finally closed for the evening. "Most folks take a week to remember where we keep the different sizes of nails." Vivian allowed herself a small smile. "I was a schoolteacher back east. Organization becomes second nature." Nathan's eyebrows rose. "A schoolteacher? Montrose is looking to establish a proper school by next year. They've been making do with rotating lessons at the church." "I didn't come here to teach," Vivian said quickly, the reminder of why she had come bringing a flush of humiliation to her cheeks. Nathan seemed to sense her discomfort. "Well, we're lucky to have you at the store, whatever the reason." He hesitated. "If you're not too tired, I thought you might join me for supper at the cafe. Mrs. Wilkins makes a fine roast chicken on Tuesdays." Vivian almost refused out of habit, the protective instinct to keep her distance still strong. But the thought of returning to her small room alone with nothing but her thoughts for company was suddenly unbearable. "That would be lovely," she said instead. The cafe was busy, but Mrs. Wilkins had saved them a small table near the back. Several patrons nodded to Nathan as they passed, some casting curious glances at Vivian. She felt exposed, certain everyone knew her story, knew how foolish she'd been. "Don't mind them," Nathan said quietly. "Small towns run on gossip, but they forget quick enough when something more interesting comes along. And what if I don't want to be forgotten?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Nathan studied her face for a long moment. "Then you give them something worth remembering you for." He smiled. "Something tells me you're more than capable of that, Miss Shaw." The meal was pleasant, with Nathan sharing stories about Montrose and its inhabitants. He had a gift for observation, painting vivid pictures of the townsfolk with respectful humor. Vivian found herself laughing for the first time since arriving in Colorado. "There's a story behind everyone who ends up in a place like Montrose," Nathan said as they walked back to the store under a sky brilliant with stars. "Some are running from something, some running to something. Either way, it takes courage to start over." "Or desperation," Vivian replied softly. "That too." Nathan stopped walking, turning to face her. "Whatever brought you here, Miss Shaw, it doesn't define who you are or what you might become." His words struck a chord so deep that Vivian had to look away, afraid she might cry. "Thank you for today, for everything." "Get some rest," he said gently. "Store opens at 7. Lying in bed that night, Vivian tried to reconcile the unexpected turn her life had taken. 1 week ago, she'd been devastated, contemplating the long journey back east with nothing but shame to show for her adventure. Now, she had a job, a room, and the faint stirrings of something that felt dangerously like hope. She told herself not to trust it. Nathan Forrester's kindness was surely temporary, a Christian duty to help someone in need. Once she was on her feet, his interest would wane. Men made promises they never intended to keep. She'd learned that lesson at great cost. The next morning, a letter arrived from Boston. Her former landlady had forwarded it to the Montrose post office. It was from the school board, expressing regret at her hasty departure and offering to hold her position until the fall term if she wished to return, an escape route. A way to salvage her dignity and return to the life she knew. Vivian tucked the letter into her pocket, unsure why the prospect of returning to Boston filled her with such heaviness. Days turned into weeks as Vivian settled into a routine at Forrester's general store. The work was demanding but satisfying, and Nathan proved to be a fair employer. They developed an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's movements during busy periods, comfortable with silence during quiet ones. Vivian learned that Nathan had come from Missouri originally, that he'd fought briefly for the Union during the final months of the Civil War, despite being barely 16, that he'd tried his hand at mining and ranching before finding his place as a merchant. He spoke little of family, and she didn't press. Everyone had wounds they preferred to keep covered. The townsfolk began to accept her presence, no longer watching her with curiosity or whispering when she passed. Several even specifically requested her assistance when they visited the store, appreciating her eye for quality fabric or her knack for remembering exactly what they'd purchased previously. One afternoon, as Vivian was arranging a new shipment of books that had arrived from Denver, the bell above the door chimed. Looking up, she froze. Edward Blackley stood in the entrance, as handsome as she remembered, with his golden hair and confident smile. "Vivian," he said, removing his hat with a flourish. "You're looking well. I heard you'd found employment." She straightened, gripping the edge of the counter for support. "What do you want, Edward?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I wanted to explain. Things were complicated when you arrived. Margaret's father had made certain arrangements that were beneficial to my future here. I couldn't turn them down." You could have told me before I sold everything I owned and traveled halfway across the country, Vivian replied, proud of how steady her voice remained. Edward had the grace to look somewhat abashed. I intended to write, but I thought it would be kinder in person. He leaned in conspiratorially. The truth is, I've realized my mistake. Margaret is pretty enough, but she lacks your spirit, your intelligence. The bell chimed again as Nathan entered, arms loaded with supplies. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in the scene. "Everything all right, Miss Shaw?" he asked, setting down his burden. "Perfectly fine," she answered, relief flooding through her at his presence. "Mr. Blackley was just leaving." Edward's smile tightened. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with Vivian privately, perhaps over dinner this evening." "I'm afraid I'm otherwise engaged," Vivian said coldly. "Another time, then." Edward placed his hat back on his head. "I'll be in touch, Vivian. We have unfinished business, you and I." After he left, Nathan busied himself with unpacking supplies, his movements more forceful than necessary. "That the reason you came to Montrose?" he finally asked. Vivian nodded, shame washing over her anew. "Edward and I corresponded for nearly a year after meeting at a friend's wedding in St. Louis. He painted such a beautiful picture of life here, asked me to come be his wife." She laughed bitterly. "By the time I arrived, he'd married a rancher's daughter with better prospects than a schoolteacher with modest savings." Nathan's expression darkened. "Blackley's had his eye on joining the upper crust since arriving 2 years ago. Married Margaret Tyler within a month of her father buying the largest cattle operation in the county." "I was a fool," Vivian said quietly. "No," Nathan countered firmly. "You trusted someone who didn't deserve it. That's his shame, not yours." The simple truth of his words eased something inside her. "Thank you for that." That evening, Nathan surprised her by producing tickets to a traveling show performing at the town hall. "Thought you might appreciate a distraction," he explained. "And it keeps your evening legitimately engaged, just as you told Blackley." The performance was a curious mix of Shakespearean monologues, folk songs, and magic tricks, but the traveling players attacked their material with such enthusiasm that Vivian found herself genuinely entertained. Nathan sat beside her, his occasional comments making her laugh, his shoulder warm against hers in the crowded hall. Afterward, they strolled back to the store under another brilliant display of stars, the mountain air crisp and clean. "I received a letter from Boston last week," Vivian said suddenly. "My teaching position is still available if I want it." Nathan's stride faltered momentarily. "Will you go?" A month ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. She looked up at the vast expanse of stars, so much more visible here than in Boston. "Now I'm not so certain." "Montrose is growing," Nathan said carefully. "There's opportunity here for someone with your education and capabilities." "Is that why you came west? For opportunity?" Nathan was quiet for so long that Vivian thought he might not answer. "I came west because there was nothing left for me back home," he finally said. "My parents died in a fever outbreak when I was 14. I lied about my age to join the Union Army, thinking I'd find some purpose there." His voice grew distant. "After the war, I drifted, did some things I'm not proud of. Then one day I woke up and didn't recognize the man I'd become." They had reached the store, but neither made a move to go inside. "What changed?" Vivian asked softly. "I met a man named Jacob Wise in Denver. Old-timer who'd seen it all: the gold rush, Indian wars, boom towns, bust towns. He told me something I've never forgotten." Nathan's eyes reflected the starlight as he looked at her. "He said, son, a man can spend his whole life running from who he was, or he can start building who he wants to be." The next day, I headed for Montrose with nothing but determination and Jacob's words. Vivian felt a connection to this man that went beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. And who did you want to be? Someone worthy of the second chance I'd been given. His gaze held hers. Someone who might eventually deserve a good woman's trust. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Vivian's heart raced as Nathan took a step closer. "I should warn you," he said quietly. "I'm not in the habit of making promises I can't keep." Before she could respond, hoofbeats pounded down the street and a rider pulled up sharply beside them. "Nate, fire at the Tyler Ranch," the man shouted. "Margaret's trapped in the house. Edward's in Denver on business." The moment shattered. Nathan was already moving, calling instructions. "Get the volunteer brigade. I'll ride ahead." "I'm coming with you," Vivian said, gathering her skirts. "It's too dangerous. I may not like Margaret Tyler Blackley, but I won't stay behind while she's in danger," Vivian insisted. "I was on the Boston Ladies Auxiliary Fire Brigade for 3 years. Something like admiration flashed in Nathan's eyes. "Then, we'd better hurry." The Tyler Ranch was ablaze when they arrived, flames licking at the night sky. Ranch hands were forming a bucket brigade from the well, but the fire had already engulfed half the main house. "Where's Margaret?" Nathan demanded, leaping from his horse. "Second floor, east bedroom," one of the hands shouted. "Can't reach her, staircase is gone." Nathan grabbed a blanket from a nearby wagon, soaked it in the water trough, and wrapped it around himself. "I'm going in through the back. The kitchen stairs might still be intact." "Nathan, wait." Vivian caught his arm. "There's a ladder in the barn. I saw it when we rode in. We can reach the balcony outside her room." His hesitation lasted only a second before he nodded sharply. Together, they ran to the barn, emerging with a heavy wooden ladder between them. Ranch hands helped them position it beneath Margaret's balcony as flames began to consume that wing of the house. "I'll go," Nathan said, already starting up the ladder. "We'll both go," Vivian countered, following close behind. "She might be unconscious. You'll need help carrying her." The heat was intense as they reached the balcony, the glass doors already cracking from the temperature. Nathan kicked them in and they entered a smoke-filled bedroom. "Margaret," Vivian called, dropping to her knees where the air was clearer. A weak cough from beside the bed answered her. Margaret Blackley lay on the floor in her nightgown, a wet cloth pressed to her face. Her eyes widened in surprise when she recognized Vivian. "Can you walk?" Nathan asked, already helping her to her feet. "I think so," Margaret wheezed, then doubled over coughing. "Put your arm around me," Vivian instructed, supporting the woman's weight. Together, they made their way back to the balcony as sections of the ceiling began to collapse behind them. The ladder descent was harrowing, with Margaret barely conscious between them. When they finally reached the ground, cheers erupted from the gathered ranch hands and the newly arrived townspeople. Dr. Phillips rushed forward to examine Margaret, who was quickly wrapped in blankets and given water. The fire brigade had arrived and was working to contain the blaze, though it was clear the house couldn't be saved. "You saved my life," Margaret said weakly, looking up at Vivian with confusion. "After everything Edward did." "That has nothing to do with this," Vivian replied simply. Margaret studied her for a moment, then closed her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Later, as they watched the fire brigade's continued efforts from a safe distance, Nathan handed Vivian a cup of coffee from the pot someone had thought to brew. "That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen," he said, his voice a mixture of admiration and lingering fear. "Sometimes they're the same thing," Vivian replied, suddenly exhausted as the excitement faded. She swayed slightly, and Nathan's arm came around her waist to steady her. "Let's get you home," he said softly. The ride back to Montrose was quiet, both of them lost in thought. When they reached the store, Nathan insisted on examining the burn Vivian had sustained on her arm during their rescue, cleaning and bandaging it with gentle efficiency. "You're good at that," she observed as he tied off the bandage. "Plenty of practice," he replied. Hard to run a store without collecting a few injuries along the way. His hand lingered on her arm, and when Vivian looked up, his expression was intense. "I thought I might lose you tonight," he said, his voice rough. "When that ceiling started coming down." He broke off, shaking his head. "I'm still here," Vivian said softly. Nathan's hand moved to cup her cheek. "I don't want to presume," he began, then stopped, searching her face. "Vivian, I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures, but I know what I feel, and it scares me half to death." Vivian's heart hammered in her chest. "What do you feel?" "Like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you without even knowing it." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "I understand if it's too soon after Blackley, if you need time." Vivian silenced him by placing her fingers against his lips. "Edward Blackley was a dream I created from a few pretty letters. You're the man who's been standing beside me every day, showing me through actions what kind of person you truly are." Nathan's kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. Vivian answered by drawing closer, her hand finding the solid warmth of his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken beneath her palm. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. "I should go upstairs," Vivian whispered, though she made no move to leave his embrace. "You should," Nathan agreed, equally motionless. A moment later he stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "Good night, Miss Shaw," he said formally, though his eyes still burned with something far from formal. "Good night, Mr. Forrester," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips as she made her way upstairs. That night, Vivian made her decision. Boston belonged to her past. Whatever uncertainties the future held, Montrose and Nathan represented possibilities she was eager to explore. The next morning, Vivian was awakened by the sound of angry voices downstairs. She dressed quickly and descended to find Edward Blackley confronting Nathan in the middle of the store. "I demand to know what happened," Edward was shouting. "I returned from Denver to find my house in ashes and my wife claiming she was rescued by you, and—" He broke off as he noticed Vivian on the stairs. "Your wife is safe, which is what matters," Nathan replied evenly. "The fire appears to have started in the kitchen. Fortunate that we happened to be nearby when the alarm was raised." Edward's gaze shifted between them, his expression darkening. "Nearby, together, at that hour." His lips curved in a nasty smile. "How convenient." "Mind your implications, Blackley," Nathan warned, his voice dropping dangerously. "Or what?" Edward sneered. "Everyone knows why she came to Montrose, practically threw herself at my feet, begging me to honor my promise." He turned to Vivian, his eyes cruel. "Did you move on so quickly, darling? Or perhaps Forrester here was just convenient comfort after I rejected you?" The words stung, but not as deeply as they once might have. "You didn't reject me, Edward," Vivian said calmly. "You lied to me. There's a difference." "You should leave," Nathan added, stepping forward. Edward laughed. "I suppose I should thank you for taking her off my hands." "Heaven knows I dodged a bullet. All that desperate eagerness," he never finished the sentence. Nathan's fist connected with his jaw, sending Edward sprawling among the dry goods. Edward scrambled to his feet, wiping blood from his lip. "You'll regret that," he spat. "I have friends in this town." "Important friends." "So do I," Nathan replied evenly. "And mine know the difference between a man and a coward who hides behind his wife's family name." Edward straightened his jacket with exaggerated dignity. "This isn't over," he warned, then stormed out. As the door slammed behind him, Nathan turned to Vivian, his expression contrite. "I apologize for losing my temper. That was unforgivable. To his evident surprise, Vivian laughed. Actually, it was rather satisfying to watch. Her smile faded. Though I fear you've made an enemy. Edward Blackley was never going to be my friend, Nathan said dismissively. And I've faced worse enemies than dandies with wounded pride. 3 days later, Nathan closed the store early. There's somewhere I'd like to take you, he explained as he helped Vivian into the wagon he'd borrowed from the livery. They traveled for nearly an hour, following the river upstream into the foothills. Just as Vivian was beginning to wonder how much further they would go, Nathan turned the wagon onto a narrow trail that opened suddenly into a beautiful meadow ringed by aspens, their leaves shimmering gold in the late afternoon light. It's breathtaking, Vivian said as Nathan helped her down. I found this place my first year in Montrose, he explained, spreading a blanket beneath the largest aspen. I come here to think when decisions need making. They shared the simple picnic he'd packed: bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of surprisingly good wine. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks, Nathan grew thoughtful. I received an offer yesterday, he said finally, from a merchant in Denver who wants to buy my store. Vivian's heart sank. Are you considering it? I was. He turned to face her fully. Until I realized what I'd be leaving behind. The store is doing well, Vivian ventured cautiously. You've built something valuable. I wasn't talking about the store. Nathan took her hand, his expression serious. Vivian, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I think I started falling the moment you told me you didn't need my help during that bank robbery. Vivian's breath caught. Nathan, let me finish, please. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not Edward Blackley. I don't make promises lightly. If you say yes to me, it's forever, through whatever comes, good or bad. Yes to what exactly? Vivian asked, though she already knew the answer, could see it in his eyes. In response, Nathan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. Inside was a simple gold band set with a single pearl. It was my mother's, he explained, his voice husky. My father saved for 3 years to buy it for her. It's beautiful, Vivian whispered, tears threatening. Marry me, Vivian Shaw, be my partner in the store, in life, in everything. Looking into his earnest face, Vivian felt the last of her defenses crumble. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. This time their kiss held no hesitation, only promise and certainty. As they rode back to Montrose in the gathering dusk, Vivian nestled against Nathan's side, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in such a short time. She had come west chasing one man's empty promises, only to find another man whose promises were as solid as the mountains surrounding them. The following morning, they shared their news with Mrs. Wilkins, who embraced them both with tearful congratulations. Word spread quickly through the small town, and by midday, the store had received more visitors bearing well wishes than actual customers. Not everyone was pleased, however. Margaret Blackley appeared late in the afternoon, still pale from her ordeal but determined. I needed to warn you, she said without preamble. Edward is furious about your engagement. He's been meeting with Thomas Jensen. He owns the bank, she added for Vivian's benefit. Nathan frowned. Jensen holds the mortgage on the store. Margaret nodded. Edward is trying to convince him to call in the loan early. He thinks if you lose the store, Vivian will. She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Will come running back to him, Vivian finished incredulously. That's absurd. I know, Margaret agreed quietly. I just thought you should be prepared. After she left, Nathan paced the length of the store. Jensen's always been fair in our dealings, but he and Blackley's father-in-law are old friends if they press hard enough. How much is left on the mortgage? Vivian asked. About $800. I've been paying it down steadily, but I don't have that kind of cash on hand. Vivian thought of the letter from Boston still unanswered. I have savings, she said slowly. Not 800, but perhaps enough to make a difference. Nathan shook his head firmly. I won't take your savings, Vivian. We'll figure something out. It wouldn't be taking. It would be investing in our future. She stepped closer to him. You said we'd be partners. Partners share burdens. The conflict was visible on his face, pride warring with practicality. Let me try talking to Jensen first, he finally said. See what we're really dealing with. The news from the bank was worse than they had feared. Not only was Jensen calling in the remainder of the mortgage, but he was also raising the interest on the final payment, substantially, a move that reeked of Edward's vindictiveness. It's extortion, Nathan fumed as they closed the store that evening. Jensen knows perfectly well I can't raise that kind of money in 2 weeks. Then we'll sell something, Vivian insisted. The inventory, some of the fixtures, and then what? Even if we satisfy the mortgage, we'll have nothing left to restock. The store would fail anyway. Nathan ran a hand over his face. I built this place from nothing once. I can do it again somewhere else if I have to. This is our home, Vivian said firmly. I won't let Edward drive us away out of spite. That night, as Nathan walked her back to the boarding house where she had moved following their engagement, Mrs. Wilkins having insisted it was more proper than living above the store, Vivian made a decision. I'm going to speak with Margaret tomorrow, she announced. There must be something she can do to rein in her husband. Nathan looked dubious. Margaret's family has the money, but Edward seems to have the influence. I'm not sure she can help. It's worth trying, Vivian insisted. And if that fails, I have another idea. The next day, while Nathan worked with the town lawyer looking for loopholes in the mortgage agreement, Vivian rode out to the temporary cabin the Blackleys were using while their house was being rebuilt. Margaret seemed surprised but not displeased to see her. Edward's not here, she said, inviting Vivian inside. It's you I came to speak with, Vivian replied, accepting a cup of tea. The cabin was simple but comfortable, clearly built with quality materials. Photographs in expensive frames lined the mantel, the only items salvaged from the fire. I assume you're here about the store, Margaret said, settling into a chair opposite Vivian. Yes, what Edward is doing is unconscionable, Margaret sighed. I've tried reasoning with him. He won't listen. She hesitated, then added, my father isn't pleased with Edward either. The fire investigation revealed that Edward had reduced the number of ranch hands to save money, leaving no one to monitor the kitchens at night. Father believes Edward's economizing nearly cost me my life. Could your father help with the bank situation? Vivian asked hopefully. He's already tried. Thomas Jensen owes Edward a personal debt, something from their time in Denver before Edward came to Montrose. He won't budge even for my father. Vivian's spirits sank. I see. There might be another way, Margaret said slowly. Edward keeps a strongbox in his desk. He doesn't know I found the key. She looked directly at Vivian. There are papers inside, letters, from women in Denver, St. Louis, even San Francisco. Other women he promised to marry, Vivian guessed. Margaret nodded. Along with receipts for gifts, hotel stays. She blushed. He doesn't know I've seen them. I was raised to believe a wife doesn't pry into her husband's affairs. But you're telling me now. Because you saved my life. Margaret straightened. And because what he's doing to you and Mr. Forrester isn't right. The letters are here. I brought them from the main house when I first found them, afraid they'd be discovered during cleaning. She rose and retrieved a small packet from behind a loose brick in the fireplace. Vivian hesitated. Are you certain about this? Edward married me for my father's money and connections. I married him because I thought he loved me. Margaret's smile was sad. "I was as deceived as you were, just in a different way." Armed with the letters, Vivian returned to Montrose, her mind racing with possibilities. She found Nathan in deep conversation with Sheriff Davis at the store. "Jensen won't budge," Nathan informed her grimly. "And now there's more. Edwards filed assault charges for that punch. Sheriff Davis is trying to talk sense into him, but I think I have a solution," Vivian interrupted, producing the packet of letters. Quickly, she explained their origin. Sheriff Davis examined one of the letters, his eyebrows rising. "This is clear evidence of fraud and misrepresentation. If these other women press charges—" "I don't want to ruin Edward," Vivian clarified. "I just want him to stop his vendetta against us." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Let me take these to Judge Wilson. Then I'll have a word with Mr. Blackley." 2 days later, Edward Blackley left Montrose on the morning stage, reportedly bound for San Francisco. The assault charges were dropped, and Thomas Jensen sent a message that the original mortgage terms were reinstated. Margaret, after a tearful conversation with her father, filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment. "I still can't believe it worked," Nathan marveled as they closed the store that evening. "Blackley just gave up." "He's a coward at heart," Vivian replied, straightening a display of ribbons. "Once he realized his past might catch up with him, he ran, leaving his wife behind again." Vivian nodded. "Margaret will be all right. Her father's arranged for her to visit cousins in New York while the divorce proceedings move forward. I think she's looking forward to a fresh start." "Much like someone else I know," Nathan said, pulling Vivian into his arms. "Have I told you today how remarkable you are?" "Not in the last hour," she teased. His expression grew serious. "I mean it, Vivian. You faced down a man who hurt you deeply, not with vengeance, but with justice. You protected our future without compromising who you are." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I fall more in love with you every day." The wedding took place a month later in the town's small church, with half of Montrose in attendance. Mrs. Wilkins provided the wedding cake. Judge Wilson performed the ceremony, and Sheriff Davis stood as Nathan's best man. Vivian wore a gown of ivory silk that Margaret had insisted on ordering from Denver as a parting gift. "Consider it my way of apologizing for my husband's behavior," she had written. "And for what it's worth, I think you've found a man truly worthy of you." As Nathan slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, his eyes never leaving hers, Vivian felt the last shadows of her earlier heartbreak dissolve completely. "I, Nathan Forrester, take you, Vivian Shaw, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his deep voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." When Vivian repeated her own vows, the words came easily, her heart full of certainty. This was no desperate gamble or fantasy built on paper promises. This was real, built on shared struggles and mutual respect. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Judge Wilson declared to enthusiastic applause. "You may kiss your bride." Nathan's kiss was tender yet possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterwards spilled from the church into the street, with tables laden with food and a fiddler playing lively tunes that soon had couples dancing in the town square. As the sun began to set, painting Montrose in golden light, Nathan led Vivian away from the festivities toward their home, the rooms above the store, now renovated and expanded to accommodate a married couple. "I have something to show you," he said, guiding her up the stairs and through the door that now bore a brass plaque reading Forrester. Inside, Vivian gasped. The main room had been transformed, with new curtains at the windows, a comfortable sofa before the fireplace, and bookshelves lining one wall. On the largest shelf sat her collection of novels and poetry, carefully unpacked from the trunks that had finally arrived from Boston. "When did you do all this?" she asked, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "I had help," Nathan admitted. "Mrs. Wilkins organized the ladies' sewing circle for the curtains. Sheriff Davis and Judge Wilson helped with the bookshelves." He looked suddenly uncertain. "Do you like it?" In answer, Vivian threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with all the love that had grown in her heart these past months. "It's perfect," she whispered against his lips. "Absolutely perfect." Later that night, as they lay tangled in the sheets of their marriage bed, Vivian rested her head on Nathan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I was thinking," she said softly, "about the town's plans for a school. MMM." Nathan's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "The committee approached me last week. They've secured funding for a proper schoolhouse, but they need a teacher by the fall term." She propped herself up to look at him. "I told them I'd consider it, but I wanted to discuss it with my husband first." Nathan's smile was warm as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I think Montrose would be lucky to have you teaching its children. And the store can manage with a part-time clerk. I've already spoken to young Tim Lawson about helping out." "You knew I'd say yes to the teaching position. I know you miss it," he said simply. "I've seen how you light up when you help the Richardson children with their letters when they come into the store. Teaching is part of who you are, Vivian. I would never ask you to give that up." Overwhelmed by his understanding, Vivian kissed him again. "How did I get so fortunate?" She wondered aloud. "I ask myself the same question every day," Nathan replied, drawing her close again. Spring turned to summer and summer to fall. The new schoolhouse opened with 27 students of varying ages and abilities, all under Vivian's enthusiastic guidance. Nathan expanded the store's inventory to include school books and supplies, and business flourished as Montrose continued to grow. In October, as the aspens turned gold and red in the mountains, Vivian made another discovery. The persistent nausea in the mornings, the unexpected fatigue in the afternoon signs she had initially attributed to the demands of teaching finally revealed their true meaning. She shared the news with Nathan one evening as they sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders, her head nestled in the crook of his neck. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "You're certain, Doctor?" "Phillips confirmed it yesterday," Vivian replied, watching his face carefully. "He thinks sometime in late spring." Nathan's expression transformed from shock to joy. He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, as if he might feel the tiny life already growing there. "A baby," he said again, and this time his voice broke slightly. "Our child. Are you pleased?" Vivian asked, though his radiant smile had already answered her question. "Pleased, Vivian, I'm—" He shook his head, words failing him. Instead, he gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what? For coming to Montrose. For staying. For believing in us enough to start a family." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "I never thought I'd have this: a wife, a child, a home filled with love. After everything I've done, everything I've seen." "The past is behind us," Vivian reminded him gently. "We look forward now." As winter blanketed Montrose in snow, Vivian continued teaching, though she had already informed the school board that she would need a replacement by spring. Her students were progressing well, particularly the older girls who had previously received only sporadic education. Several had expressed interest in becoming teachers themselves someday, a possibility Vivian enthusiastically encouraged. Nathan was busier than ever, the holiday season bringing increased trade to the store. He hired additional help, not wanting Vivian to overtax herself, despite her protestations that pregnancy was not an illness. "Humor me," he would say, kissing her forehead when she tried to lift something heavy or work late. "Let me take care of you for once." Christmas brought a letter from Margaret, now resettled in New York and reportedly engaged to a widowed publisher who appreciated her intelligence and quiet strength. "I think of you often," she wrote, "and am grateful our paths crossed, however briefly. My father sends his regards to you both, and hopes the store continues to prosper." There was no word of Edward Blackley, though rumors occasionally reached Montrose of a handsome, confident man working the gambling houses in San Francisco. Whether it was truly Edward or someone similar hardly mattered anymore. He had become a distant memory, important only for the role he had inadvertently played in bringing Vivian and Nathan together. As Vivian's pregnancy progressed, her body changing to accommodate the growing life within, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The heartbreak that had once seemed unbearable now appeared as merely a stepping stone to a far greater happiness than she could have imagined. One evening in early April, as the first wildflowers began to appear in the meadows around Montrose, Vivian found Nathan in the nursery they had prepared, adjusting the blanket in the cradle he had crafted with his own hands. "What are you doing?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe, one hand supporting her swollen belly. Nathan looked up with a slightly sheepish expression. "Just making sure everything's ready. Dr. Phillips said it could be any day now." Vivian smiled, crossing to stand beside him. "The baby won't mind if the blanket isn't perfectly straight." "I want everything to be perfect," Nathan admitted, placing his hand on her stomach just as the baby delivered a forceful kick. His eyes widened in delight, as they did every time he felt their child move. "Nothing in life is perfect," Vivian said softly, "but our family comes very close." Nathan drew her into his arms, careful of her condition. "Sometimes I still worry," he confessed, "that I'm not good enough, that I'll make mistakes as a father." "Of course you will," Vivian replied matter-of-factly. "We both will, but we'll learn together." She placed her hand over his heart. "This is what matters, that our child knows they are loved unconditionally and completely." 3 days later, after 18 hours of labor that tested Vivian's endurance to its limits, their son was born as the first light of dawn broke over the mountains. With a shock of dark hair like his father's and eyes of deepest blue, Thomas Jacob Forrester entered the world with a lusty cry that immediately captured his parents' hearts. "He's perfect," Nathan whispered, cradling his newborn son with hands that trembled slightly. "Absolutely perfect." His gaze shifted to Vivian, exhausted but radiant in the bed, just like his mother. "We did it," Vivian said softly, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny fingers. "We created this miracle together." Nathan leaned down to kiss her forehead, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you," he said simply, "more than I have words to express." The following weeks were a blur of midnight feedings, diaper changes, and the constant wonder of watching their son discover the world. Nathan proved to be a natural father, walking the floor with Thomas when he was colicky, singing old trail songs in his deep voice, until the baby drifted back to sleep. Vivian recovered her strength gradually, amazed at how completely this small being had transformed their lives. The store continued to operate, now with Tim Lawson handling most of the day-to-day business under Nathan's supervision. Vivian herself had no immediate plans to return to teaching, content for now to focus on her family. One evening, as summer once again painted the landscape in vibrant greens and golds, Nathan suggested they take Thomas to the aspen meadow where he had proposed. "He's only 3 months old," Vivian pointed out, though she was already packing a basket with supplies. "He won't remember it." "But we will," Nathan replied, lifting the sleeping baby into his arms with practiced ease. "Besides, I want our son to know all the special places around Montrose. This town is his heritage." The meadow was even more beautiful than Vivian remembered, wildflowers carpeting the ground between the aspens, whose leaves shimmered in the gentle breeze. They spread a blanket in the shade of the largest tree, laying Thomas on his stomach for a few minutes of tummy time, as Dr. Phillips had recommended. As their son kicked his legs and made determined efforts to lift his head, Vivian and Nathan watched with the besotted expressions of first-time parents. "He's going to be strong like you," Vivian observed. "Look at how he already tries to push himself up." "And stubborn like his mother," Nathan added with a grin. "Once he sets his mind to something, there's no stopping him." Vivian leaned against Nathan's shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been?" she asked. "If Edward had kept his promise, or if I'd returned to Boston when I had the chance." Nathan was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her waist. "I try not to dwell on might-have-beens," he finally said, "but I do thank God every day that you stayed. Even when I arrived bruised by shame and heartbreak, not exactly the most promising beginning." Nathan turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Especially then, because that's when I saw your true strength." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch infinitely tender. "Do you remember what I said to you that night after the fire at the Tyler Ranch?" Vivian nodded, the memory still vivid. "You said we mend together. And we have, haven't we? Whatever breaks or bruises life has given us, we've healed them together." He glanced at their son, now sleeping peacefully on the blanket, and created something beautiful in the process. Vivian felt tears spring to her eyes, overwhelmed by the simple truth of his words. "Yes," she whispered, "we have." As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, they gathered their things and their sleeping son, making the journey back to Montrose, back to the home and life they had built together. The path hadn't been smooth or straight, but it had led them exactly where they were meant to be. 5 years later, Montrose had grown into a thriving community of nearly 2,000 souls. The railroad had finally reached the town, bringing increased commerce and opportunities. Forrester's general store had expanded into the vacant building next door, now offering everything from farming implements to fine fabrics imported from the East. Vivian divided her time between the store. Their growing family, Thomas, had been joined by a sister, Catherine Margaret, 2 years earlier, and supervising the town's educational committee. Though she no longer taught full-time, she remained deeply involved in ensuring Montrose's children received the best possible education. Nathan had become a respected figure in town, serving on the town council and helping to establish the region's first bank independent of Denver financial interests. He was the same steady, principled man Vivian had fallen in love with, though the years had softened some of his rougher edges. On a bright autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted from the trees lining Montrose's Main Street, Nathan and Vivian stood hand in hand watching the ceremony to break ground for the town's new library, a project they had championed and partially funded. "Mrs. Forrester," Mayor Wilson called, gesturing Vivian forward, "would you do us the honor of turning the first shovel? This library might never have happened without your persistence." As Vivian stepped forward, accepting the silver-plated ceremonial shovel, she caught Nathan's eye. His expression held the same pride and love she'd seen the day Thomas was born, the day Catherine took her first steps, and countless moments in between. "This," she thought as she pushed the shovel into the soil to enthusiastic applause, was what it meant to build a life with purpose. Not the fleeting excitement of romantic promises, but the steady accumulation of days filled with meaning and connection. Later, as they walked home with Thomas racing ahead and Catherine perched on her father's shoulders, Vivian reached for Nathan's free hand. "Happy?" he asked, his smile reflecting the contentment she felt. "Completely," she replied, squeezing his fingers. "Though I was thinking we might need to expand again soon," Nathan's stride faltered. "The store. We just added the new section last year." Vivian laughed, placing her free hand meaningfully on her stomach. "Not the store." Understanding dawned in Nathan's eyes, followed by joy so bright it nearly took her breath away. "Are you certain?" Dr. Phillips confirmed it yesterday. "Early spring, he thinks." Nathan let out a whoop that startled Catherine and brought Thomas running back to see what the excitement was about. "Your mama," Nathan explained, kneeling to their son's level, "has just given me the best news in the world." "What news?" Thomas demanded, his expression serious beyond his 5 years. Vivian knelt beside Nathan. "How would you two feel about having a new brother or sister?" Catherine, at 3, looked confused, but Thomas's face split into a wide grin. "Really? Like Billy Henderson's new baby brother?" "Very much like that," Nathan confirmed. "When?" Thomas asked practically. "Not until spring," Vivian answered. "Babies take time to grow, just like the seeds we planted in the garden." This explanation satisfied both children, who quickly became distracted by a butterfly fluttering past. As they resumed their walk home, Nathan's arm slipped around Vivian's waist, drawing her close. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of all they had built together. "And I love you," Vivian replied, leaning into his strength, knowing with bone-deep certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else together. That evening, as they prepared for bed in the comfortable house they had built behind the store, Nathan paused, watching Vivian brush her hair before the mirror. At 32, she was more beautiful to him than ever, the passing years having added depth and character to her features. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, catching his reflection in the mirror. Nathan moved to stand behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "I was remembering something my father told me once when I was very young. He said that the true measure of a man isn't in what he accomplishes alone, but in what he builds with others." His hand slid down to encircle her waist, coming to rest over the place where their child grew. "I didn't understand then, but I do now." Vivian turned in his embrace, her arms winding around his neck. "We've built something wonderful, haven't we? More than I ever dreamed possible." Nathan's forehead rested against hers. "And we're not finished yet." As they drifted to sleep that night, wrapped in each other's arms with the sounds of their children's peaceful breathing filtering from the nearby rooms, Vivian's last conscious thought was of gratitude for the broken promise that had brought her west, for the shame that had nearly sent her home, and most of all, for the man who had shown her that wounds could heal and hearts could mend, if only they faced life together. In the years that followed, Montrose continued to grow, and with it, the Forrester family and their enterprises. Their third child, a son they named William Jacob, arrived healthy and strong, with his mother's auburn hair and his father's determined chin. The children thrived in the community their parents had helped build, each developing their own interests and strengths. Thomas, thoughtful and methodical like Nathan, showed an early aptitude for business and numbers. By his teenage years, he was already managing the store's inventory with remarkable efficiency. Catherine, vibrant and outspoken, developed a passion for literature and teaching that mirrored Vivian's own, while young William revealed a talent for working with animals and the land that led him toward ranching. Through it all, the joys and challenges of raising three distinct personalities, the continued growth of their business interests, their ongoing contributions to Montrose's development, Nathan and Vivian remained each other's constant. Their love, founded on mutual respect and shared purpose, deepened with each passing season. They weathered the inevitable storms of life. A fire that damaged part of the store in 1890 quickly rebuilt with the town's help. Thomas's dangerous bout of pneumonia when he was 12, the economic downturn that threatened many of the region's businesses. Each challenge was met together, each burden shared, each victory celebrated as one. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire town turned out to honor the couple who had become, in many ways, the heart of Montrose. A grand celebration was held in the town square, with speeches from those whose lives the Forresters had touched. When I first met Vivian Shaw, she was hiding behind an overturned wagon during a bank robbery, Nathan recalled in his address, drawing laughter from the crowd. She told me in no uncertain terms that she didn't need my help. He smiled at his wife, seated beside him on the platform. She was wrong about that, but I was wrong too because I didn't realize how much I needed hers. Vivian rose to stand beside him, their hands finding each other's with the ease of long practice. 25 years ago, I came to Montrose broken and ashamed, believing the best part of my life was behind me, she said, her clear voice carrying across the hushed square. I couldn't have been more mistaken. Everything I truly value, my husband, our children, this community we love, lay ahead, waiting to be discovered. As darkness fell and lanterns illuminated the square, the couple shared a dance to the same fiddle tune that had played at their wedding. Though their hair now held strands of silver, and the years had left their mark in the lines of their faces, they moved together with the graceful familiarity of a lifetime's partnership. "Still happy, Mrs. Forrester," Nathan murmured as he guided her through the steps. Vivian's smile, as radiant as ever, was answer enough. "More with every passing day," she replied, "though I still wonder sometimes how different things might have been if Edward had kept his promise." "And," Nathan prompted, his eyes twinkling. "And I thank God every day that he didn't," Vivian concluded, reaching up to touch her husband's cheek. "Some promises are meant to be broken so that better ones can be made." Nathan's arms tightened around her waist. "Like the one I made to love you for the rest of my days." "Exactly like that one," Vivian agreed, standing on tiptoe to kiss him lightly, heedless of the townspeople watching with indulgent smiles. "A promise I intend to hold you to for many years to come." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Nathan replied, his voice husky with emotion. "Not a single day." As the music swelled around them and their children watched from the edge of the dance floor, Thomas tall and serious at 20, Catherine lovely and vivacious at 18, William gangly and good-natured at 15, Vivian and Nathan Forrester continued their dance, moving in perfect harmony just as they had moved through life. Together, always together, through whatever came their way. And in that moment, amid the celebration of a quarter-century of shared life, they both knew with absolute certainty that the words Nathan had spoken on that night long ago, when Vivian was bruised by shame after a broken promise, had contained a truth even greater than they had realized at the time. "We mend together," he had said, holding her close, and they had. And they would continue to do so for all the days that remained to them.